Remember the Forgotten.
Chapter 21. Round and Round. Pasley leant against a thick tree underneath the darkness that consumed the woods. The sounds of snoring and the flickering of the fire only reaching him gently from the camp a few dozen feet behind him. He watched the unmoving gloom between the gently shivering trees over towards the direction of the road. The air was peaceful here, and he calmly took a long, deep breath before he nestled himself further against the comfortable groove of the tree's bark. Then he heard it. A loud crack, piercing the silence of the night like a knife. Paz swiftly but quietly drew his sword and began to creep slowly forward toward the sound. But his ears soon perked at even more noises. A series of snapping, rustling, coming from left, right and centre. It was as if there was a group approaching. Pasley took a step back, his eyes darting back and forth ahead of him while his heart began to race. Not taking his eyes off of the gloom ahead, where the dim grey shadows had now begun to display movement, Pasley quickly retreated back toward the others. "Up, everyone!" he whispered, as loudly as he possibly could. "Something's coming!" Sapphire stirred first, quickly becoming aware of her surroundings and pressing herself to her feet. "What is it?" she asked, putting her hand on the hilt of her blade like she was already prepared for a fight. James, meanwhile, moaned and muffled, face down on his bedroll. Sapphire gave him a kick in the side, urging him to finally roll over and open his eyes. "What's going on?" asked Aurora anxiously, now alert and sat up in her bedroll. "We need to go," Pasley urged them all, his lips pursed and eyes wide in anticipation of what might be coming. Zircon and Samuel appeared to have awoken now as well. The former had already slipped out of his bedroll and began to slowly back away, his eyes darting every which way in search of danger. But Samuel simply sat still, upright. He stayed there, eyes open but emotionless. All of a sudden, the sounds Pasley had heard approaching became known to all, as the gentle snapping and rustling in the growth became the cacophony of things, horrid things, sprinting through the woods. All heads, even Samuel's, spun to stare as the creatures emerged from the darkness ahead of them. They stepped from the shadows slowly, as if for them there was no urgency, and loomed forward. The skin was grey, limbs long and ending in sharp claws, demonic horns curved outward from their heads, and a malicious, unmoving grin was planted upon each of their faces. There were a dozen of them, at least, but the bustling and shuffling shadows and the inky blackness behind them left no room for comfort. As James and Sapphire drew their blades and stepped into formation back to back, the creatures continued to stalk forward, stepping around trees to begin widely encircling the group. They seemed to appear at the sides out of nowhere, as if pouring from the darkness itself. "How the hell did they find us?" growled James, turning his head from one creature to another as the fire illuminated them dangerously, spinning around wildly in constant anticipation of attack. "Run!" Paz then shouted, motioning to the others. "We'll hold them off!" At the edge of the clearing, the horses bucked and whinnied in terror, before their reins were severed by the purposeful and wicked claws of the encroaching swarm. As if commanded by the unwavering menace of the monstrous presence, the mounts hurriedly broke out into panicked, fearful sprints and fled loudly into the wooded night. Meanwhile, the demonic horrors remained encircling the group, ever continuing to pour from the forest and move round bit by bit as the gap of escape towards the back grew narrower. They lunged forward occasionally, but always pulled back to their formation in hesitation, as if waiting for the perfect time to strike. Samuel sat still in his bedroll, eyes fixated on the creatures, and not making a move to run. "Samuel!" Aurora shouted to him. "We need to go!" Samuel did not even turn his head. He simply remained still as the circle of creatures, slowly but surely, inched ever closer to him. "Come on!" shouted Zircon to Aurora, voice shaky as he turned to her. "There's no time!" Zircon didn't hesitate, breaking into a sprint and heading for the small gap that yet remained in the monster's vicious encircling. Aurora, despite her fears, took the cue and followed right behind him. They ran desperately. Just as they were about to step free of their attacker's clutches and escape into the pitch-black woods, a shadow fell upon them, as something else suddenly entered the fray. Floating down from the darkness among the branches, hair and cloak flailing wildly in an unseen wind that carried her aloft, Jade had everyone turning their heads in fear as her inhumanly furious voice rang out. "Where is the eye?" Before Zircon could react, she ceased to float and landed on the ground in front of him, suddenly grabbing his shoulder. He felt it start to burn. A horrid sizzling sound filled the air, and wispy black smoke began to rise from his flesh. The shoulder of his cloak immediately burnt to dust around her hand, but his skin, charring under the intense heat of her magic, quickly came to match its colour. "Where is the eye?" Jade screamed again, her face right up against his. Zircon let out a bone-chilling scream as the ever-increasing pain reached his consciousness. He could bear it for only a moment. "He has it!" Zircon roared. "Him over there with the book!" With his eyes pressed shut in agony, he pointed backwards, vaguely in the direction of Samuel, whose anxious gaze was now firmly planted on the terrifying sorceress. Jade shoved Zircon to the side with ease, knocking him helplessly to the ground as she stepped past and towards Samuel. Her strides purposeful and face menacing, she demanded of the boy, "Give me the eye."